During the Yom Kippur War in 1973, Shlomo was invited to Israel several times to play for the armed forces. When he wasn't out on the road, we'd sit in our hotel room during blackouts and read, study together. During one of those evenings, Shlomo suddenly sang, "Gewalt, what a story!" I said, "What is it, darling?" He told me he was reading a book of stories about the Baal Shem Tov, and there was one story that was so far out. So he would tell me a little bit of it, then continue reading, and again say, "What a story, Gewalt, Gewalt," and tell me the story. It was indeed quite a way out story. And a few days later, while we were walking down the streets in Tel Aviv with our friends Miriam and Elia Sukkot, Shlomo said, "Why don't you tell them the story?" I started talking to them about the story at our hotel. And it was a story within a story, because everywhere we walked, some soldier stopped to tell Shlomo about his experiences in the war. Some shopkeeper invited us in. Somebody wanted us to have coffee. And each time it was after a little bit of the story, almost as if Shlomo were telling it to me again with the interruptions of the reading. The story went on forever. We walked to the other side of Tel Aviv till it was finished. And it is inscribed indelibly in my heart. This is the story called the Holy Mamzer, as told by the Baal Shem Tov to his Hasidim. One day the Baal Shem was walking down the street and he said to his Hasidim, "Come, we must go to the Shiva. The mother of the Holy Mamzer has passed away, the mother of the Holy Bastard." The Hasidim said, "Baal Shem, this is very bizarre. What's the story?" So the Baal Shem Tov told them, years ago in Poland there was a very wealthy man. His wife passed away when his children were young, and he unfortunately passed away very shortly thereafter. His two young children decided they were never going to marry, they were going to never move out of the house, they were going to stay together so they could amass and keep all the wealth to themselves. They thought they never wanted to share it with anyone. They lived together in this house, and they grew closer and closer, and they grew greedier and greedier. And as they grew older, they eventually lived together in a way in which brother and sister should not live together. And very heartbrokenly, this young girl realized she was pregnant. And with the realization of her pregnancy came the realization of how off she'd been in her life and how terrible she and her brother had been in this ingrown, incestuous life they were living. So she packed her bag and went away to another small city, and she lived in a small inn and gave birth to her child. She knew she had to give it away in order to have a life, and it broke her heart because her little boy was so beautiful. She wrote a letter to him saying, "My darling son, I love you so much. You came into this world in a hard way, and I want you to have a real life, a holy life. Forgive me for giving you away, forgive me. And just know somewhere in the world you have a mother who adores you." She took the note, a bag of gold coins, and she wrapped her son up in a little basket. And in the middle of the night, she put her baby on the doorstep of the shul and hid behind a building to watch and see what would become of him. At dawn, the shamas came down the street very happily, running to open up the shul for morning prayers. And he saw on the doorstep a basket. And when he realized it was a baby that someone had left, he was absolutely blown away with joy. He and his wife had been married for 15 years, and they'd been praying for a child the whole time, and they had never been answered. And here, on the doorstep of the shul, is a baby for him and his wife. He ran home with the baby and read the note, and they rejoiced because they knew that they could keep this child and raise it as their own. And what a child he grew to be. He was a beautiful boy, and not only was he beautiful and loving and kind, he was such a scholar. He was a brilliant young man, and as he grew, his prowess in learning grew even more and more. One day when he was 10 years old, he came running home from school crying, and he said to his parents, "Who am I? Who am I? Tell me, please." And they said, "What happened to you?" He said, "I did especially well in school today, and I felt so proud. And after school, the boys started pushing me around and yelling at me, and they said, it doesn't matter if you're good in learning, you're just a mamzer." My heart just stopped. I knew somewhere inside it was the truth. Please, please tell me who I am. So with a broken heart, his parents told him the story about how he wasn't truly their son. And from the hiding place they had put the little basket, and the money, and the letter. They brought down his whole history. And he read his letter from his mother and cried. And he said to his parents, I love you so much, you've been so good to me, but I can't stay here anymore. I can't live with the glare of the boys, their accusing eyes. I'm going to go to another town, and I'll go to yeshiva. I'll write you a note, I'll let you know that I'm well. And he kissed his parents goodbye and left. And he traveled for many days, and he came across a small town that was far enough away where no one ever had heard of him or his family. And he went to the yeshiva, and the Rosh Yeshiva, of course, was so completely taken with his genius that he became his top student immediately. And he sat quietly and he learned and he learned. For 3 years he learned, and when it came to his bar mitzvah, the whole community rejoiced at the treasure they had. This young man was a beautiful person. In the meantime, his Holy Mother had spent the last 13 years doing tshuva. She repented so much for her life. She gave to the poor. She created chesed funds in every way she could. She became part of her community. She was known as everyone knew her as a loving and caring woman. And now she decided, she was 26 years old, she was still a young woman, she had so much money, she wanted to do something very special. So she thought to herself, maybe I'll marry a very promising student who's not very wealthy, and I'll support him and he can become a shining star to all of Israel. And she started traveling around Poland and Russia looking for a yeshiva bocher whom she could marry. And everywhere she went, she was introduced to the most promising young men. But none of them touched her heart. And she would say, I'll come back, I'll think about it, thank you, I'm just looking. Finally, after months and months of travel, she came to this small yeshiva in a small town in Poland, where she was introduced to the top genius of the yeshiva. And the minute she saw him, her heart went out to him, and he looked at her and he loved her right away too. Obviously, their hearts were connected in a deep way. They didn't know they were mother and son. The wedding was very beautiful. There was a simcha. Everybody celebrated with them. They were shining and so happy and seemed so much in love. But God had mercy. For many reasons, they could not consummate their marriage. There was always a crisis in the community, or she was unwell, or she was in her time of month. For some reason, they just couldn't be together. And after months of being together but not consummating their marriage, she suddenly broke down in tears. She knew that it was because of her past, and she said to her husband, I have to tell you about my life. I have to tell you my horrible secrets. I have to tell you who I am, because I know this is why we haven't been together. And he said, no, it's not you, it's me. I also have a secret I have to share with you. And they held each other and cried. And finally, she said, let me tell you about my life. And she unfolded this terrible saga about her and her brother and her pregnancy and how she moved to the small town. And when she came to the part about the basket and the gold coins and the letter and the shul, he knew that this was his mother. Anyway, after comforting her, she said, tell me your secret now. He said, no, I'll tell you in the morning. And he held her until she fell asleep. And then he gathered together all the money he could find in the house and his tallis, his tefillin, his sforim. He put everything together and he left her a note saying, please don't blame yourself. It's not the story you told me that has made me run away. It's because of my own terrible sin. He didn't want her to suffer anymore. And he left, and he wandered and he wandered and he wandered. He couldn't find a place for himself in the world, and he kept praying, dear God, take me away. I don't belong here anymore. I have nothing in this world. All I keep finding is disgrace and terror. And he wandered for many, many weeks, and finally he was walking through a forest. And deep in this forest there was a little inn. And it was so isolated and so hidden, he decided maybe he could exist here. And he went in and he spoke to the innkeeper and said, I'm going to stay here for several months. I'm on a retreat just to learn and to pray. Here's my money. Don't worry about it. I've got more and I'm good for my tenure. And the innkeeper said, okay, if you want to stay here, that's fine. Not very many people come through. And he said, that's fine. I need isolation now. And all day long he would sit and pray, and he would learn. And at nighttime he would go for long walks in the forest. After several months, the innkeeper thought, this man is strange. He doesn't talk to anybody, he hardly talks to me. He doesn't eat, I don't know, I don't trust something about him. And he decided to follow him into the forest one night. After the young man stopped walking about, he stood in front of a tree and slowly started hitting his head against the tree and rocking and saying, "Dear God, please, I beg you, don't leave me in this world any longer. I don't deserve to be here. Please just take my soul. Please take my soul. I've done too many terrible things. Please, God, please take my soul." The innkeeper, hearing this, became very, very suspicious. And when the young man came back, he accosted him and said, "Now listen here. What have you done that's so terrible?" He said, "I couldn't help it. I followed you to the forest," he said, "and I really, really don't want to have an outlaw in my house. Have you killed somebody?" He says, "No, I swear to you, I've never done anything against anyone else. I promise you." He says, "Well, I don't know if you can say her." He says, "Please don't send me away." He says, "Look," he says, I know basically you're a good man," he says, "and I know that you have a hard time making a living. I'm going to give you all my gold. Here, I have a whole bag of it. All I want you to do is one thing. Lock me in your cold cellar and throw away the key. I promise you it will not be on your conscience, because I'm not one of the privileged people in this world who God would worry about if anything happened to me." He said, "Are you sure?" He says, "Yes, please just do it." He says, "It will be off your conscience and I'll be out of the way." So the innkeeper, who I guess didn't have too many horrible scruples at that time, locked him in the basement, and he just threw the key out the window. In the meantime, not too far away, in another city in Poland, one of the great rabbis of that time was dying. And on his deathbed, he said to his Hasidim, "My predecessor was my father, and as you know, I have no sons. And I will not appoint from among you my successor. But there is in this world a young man whose light shines from one corner of the world to the next. I want you to find him." And he died. So a delegation was put together of 4 men whom the Rebbe trusted and whom the community trusted, and they went about searching. They traveled through Poland, and they traveled through Russia, and they traveled through Yugoslavia, Czechoslovakia, all the ancient cities, all through Europe. They even went as far as Palestine looking for this young man. And they met many geniuses, and they met many holy people. But not one of them shone with God's light from one corner of the world to the next. After several years, they gave up hope, and they decided, let's go home, and maybe we'll start our pilgrimage again. On their way back, they came through a forest, and in the forest there was a small inn, and they decided to rest for a few days before they went back. The innkeeper was slightly nervous when this type of person came to his inn again. He was reminded of the young man whom he'd locked in his basement several years before, and he was hoping that it wasn't this young man they were searching for. One afternoon, as they were returning from a walk in the forest, one of the rabbis hit a small metal object with his foot. He bent down and picked up a key, and he thought maybe the innkeeper lost it. He walked back into the inn, and when the innkeeper saw the key in the rabbi's hand, he just lost it. "I didn't mean to," he said. I didn't want to lock him in there. He begged me. It's been weighing on my conscience. I'm really not a bad person. You have to forgive me. I didn't want to do any of this." And the rabbi said, "Hold on, what's going on?" He said, I locked a young man in my basement 4 years ago. He begged me to. And I knew that you were looking for somebody like him because you all look alike. And now when you came in with the key, I knew that I had done wrong. Please, don't report me to the police. I'm sure he's dead. It's been 4 years. He hasn't had any food or anything." And they said, "Well, we better open up the door and see what's happened down there." They opened the door, and they saw a young man sitting at the table in his tallis and tefillin, surrounded by his sforim, whose light was so strong that it shone from one side of the world to the next. And as soon as the rabbi saw him, they knew that they had found their young man who was going to be their Rebbe. They spoke with him for several hours and found out that he was just as much of a genius as his light gave indication. And they begged him, "Please come with us. Our Rebbe told us we would find you." And the young man said, "Yes, I know, I've been expecting you. I've been preparing. You go ahead and I'll be there in the next couple of weeks. I'm going to get myself back into the world." Well, the celebration in their town when this Rebbe arrived was incredible. And people soon found out what a genius he was. And not only was he a genius, he had the ability to see way into the hearts and souls of people. He could see way beyond the town and way beyond the world. He was truly a gift from God. In the meantime, his mother had been again doing tshuva. Several years had passed since her husband left her. And now she wondered what she would do with her life. She heard about this famous rabbi who was absolutely incredible, who saw so many people's secrets and could advise them, and she decided to make a pilgrimage and to see him. One day the rabbi was sitting in his study, and he said to his shamus, "A very fancy-looking woman is going to come here in a few days, and she's going to want to see me. Under no circumstances will you allow her to enter." His mother arrived at the hotel, put on her best feather hat, and went and stood on line with everyone else to see the Rebbe. She was so frightened of what the Rebbe would tell her. But strangely enough, when it came to her turn, the shamus said, "No more people today. The Rebbe's tired, that's it." And everybody was sent away. The next day she arrived earlier. And even though the Rebbe saw only 10 people, when it came to her turn, again the shamus said, "I'm sorry, the Rebbe's tired, no more people today." This went on every single day for a week. Finally she said, "This is very bizarre. Maybe the Rebbe doesn't want to see wealthy people. Maybe he only likes to see peasants. I notice I'm probably one of the only well-dressed people online." So she went back to her hotel and she said to her chambermaid, "Would you please do me a favor? Would you trade clothes with me? I'll give you my suit. I want your peasant skirt and your shawl." She said, "But madam, your clothes are so much more beautiful." No, she said, I need to have these clothes. Don't worry about it. It's my gift to you." And she took the skirt and the apron and the peasant shirt and the shawl, and she went with the shawl over her head and stood on line very early in the morning the next day. And the shamus did not recognize her. And she walked into the Rebbe's study. And he was looking down at his desk when she started talking and said, "Please, Rebbe, forgive me my sins before I even start telling them to you. I just want to know if my husband is alive or dead. I want to know whether I should marry again, whether you'll give me a get. I want to know if I'll ever be in this world without carrying around my sins." She said, "You see, I had a child out of wedlock with my brother. I gave birth to a mamzer." The Rebbe was so shocked, he just looked up and yelled, "Mother!" And she realized at that moment that sitting in front of her was not only her husband, but also her son. And the feelings that were inside of her were too powerful to contain her body in this world any longer. She had a heart attack and died. And this is the story of the Holy Mamzer, said the Baal Shem Tov. Never reveal who he really is, because truly he is a gift from God and a light unto the world.